What kind of weapon gets a soldier threatened with court-martial, yet ends up saving an entire company? In the mud of Italy, a forbidden idea created from a length of wire and a rusted shovel destroyed an entire scout car. Today, let us return to the blood-soaked battlefields of 1944 and discover what really happened. At 6:47 a.m. on March 12, 1944, outside the town of Cassino, Italy, Corporal James "Jimmy" Dalton crouched in a muddy drainage ditch, watching a German armored scout car roll toward his position at roughly 15 miles per hour. He had no anti-tank weapon, no mines, no grenades, just a length of rusted barbed wire wrapped tightly around the handle of a shovel, an improvised device that every officer in the 34th Infantry Division had explicitly forbidden him to use. The next 90 seconds would overturn doctrine. The official U.S. Army Field Manual listed 16 approved methods for disabling light armor. Dalton's method was not among them. Battalion command had threatened him twice with court-martial for unauthorized field modifications deemed dangerous to personnel. But regulations mean very little after watching 11 men die in 3 weeks, because the approved methods require equipment no one actually has. Dalton pulled the wire taut. Morning fog clung to the Leary Valley like wet cotton. Through it came the grinding whine of the scout car's engine gears protesting as it slowed. The commander's hatch was open. Someone inside was scanning, searching for American positions. Everyone knew we're here. The wire trembled in Dalton's hands. One chance. He waited. Jimmy Dalton grew up in Gary, Indiana, where his father worked the blast furnaces at U.S. Steel, 15-hour shifts, molten iron, a paycheck that barely covered rent and food for 6 children. Jimmy was the middle child, the one who spent afternoons in the rail yards instead of school learning. Which rail cars carried what, which couplings failed most often, and how to rig temporary fixes from whatever scrap metal lay around. By 17, he was apprenticing as a switchman. The job taught him to think in systems, to see how a single failure cascades into another. A loose coupler pin could derail 6 cars. A frayed cable could snap and kill a brakeman. Small details, invisible until they aren't. Those lessons were never meant for a battlefield. But on a fog-soaked morning in Italy, with a forbidden wire shaking in his hands, they were all he had. If you want to see how a forbidden wire trap and a rusted shovel stopped a German scout car in Italy, hit the like button. It helps us share more forgotten stories like this one. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the histories they never taught. Back to, he enlisted in January 1943, 3 months after his 19th birthday. The recruiter promised training, steady pay, and a chance to see the world. Dalton received 8 weeks of basic, a rifle he had never fired before, and a boat headed for North Africa. By the time he reached Italy in September 1943, he had seen enough of the world to understand that the recruiter had lied about everything else too. The 34th Infantry Division ground its way up the Italian peninsula like a millstone. Every village was contested. Every ridgeline bristled with German machine guns. Every river crossing demanded blood. But what killed more Americans than direct enemy fire was German reconnaissance. Light armored cars and half-tracks probed U.S. positions at dawn and dusk, patient and methodical, marking targets and calling in artillery on any concentration of troops they discovered. Their favorite tool was the SDK FZ-2 222, four-wheeled, open-topped, armed with a 20mm autocannon and an MG-34 machine gun, fast enough to escape trouble, armored enough to laugh at rifle fire, light enough to crawl along mountain roads the tigers and panthers couldn't touch. They appeared without warning, swept positions with cannon fire, and vanished before anyone could respond. American doctrine said reconnaissance vehicles were to be engaged with anti-tank rifles, bazookas, or mines. The problem was simple: no one had any. The entire division possessed 9 bazookas. Anti-tank rifles had already been phased out. Mines were reserved for fixed defenses, not daily patrol lines. So men died quietly while scout cars mapped their positions, and 12 hours later, artillery erased them. Private First Class Eddie Kowalski died on February 18, 1944. A 222 rolled past his foxhole at dawn. Kowalski raised his M1 Garand and fired. The round sparked harmlessly off the armor. The scout car's MG-34 replied. 3 rounds tore into his chest. He was 20 years old, from Pittsburgh, the son of a machinist. He had enlisted on the same day as Dalton. Sergeant Mike Brennan died on February 23rd. Another 222, another dawn patrol. By then, the pattern was impossible to ignore. The Germans did not need to overrun positions to destroy them. They only needed to see them. Brennan tried to stop it with a grenade from 30 yards. He missed. The autocannon found him instead. He was the man who had taught Dalton how to build a fighting position, how to read the ground, how to keep his feet dry in Italian mud that never seemed to dry. 24 years old, Brooklyn, 4 sisters. His mother would receive the telegram on March 2nd. Corporal Luis Vargas died on March 4th. Same pattern. The 222 were getting bolder. This one drove straight through the company's position at dusk, machine gun blazing. Vargas was from El Paso, spoke better Spanish than English, always shared his cigarettes, even when he had only 3 left. The autocannon caught him running for cover. The medic could not stop the bleeding. By early March 1944, the 34th Infantry Division had lost 47 men in 6 weeks to reconnaissance vehicles alone. Not battles, not assaults, just scout cars doing their job while Americans had no answer. Dalton watched every one of them. He knew Kowalski and Brennan personally. Vargas had been in his squad. Each death felt preventable. Each one sharpened the anger. The battalion response never changed. Maintain defensive posture, conserve anti-tank assets, await resupply. After Vargas died, Captain Morrison gathered 20 exhausted soldiers inside a barn that smelled of gunpowder and wet wool. Morrison's uniform was clean. He had arrived from division headquarters that morning. Higher command, he said, was aware of the reconnaissance problem. New bazookas were expected within the month. Until then, discipline and protocol. Dalton stood at the back and said nothing at first. The Gary rail yards had taught him that when equipment doesn't arrive, you improvise. The scout cars always used the same roads. They were fast but predictable, and they all shared a weakness no one was exploiting: their wheels. Sir Dalton finally said, "What if we rig wire across the roads low tight enough to catch the axles?" Morrison looked at him as if he had suggested fighting tanks with spitballs. The field manual was clear, he said. Wire entanglements were defensive obstacles, not booby traps. The answer was no. They would not set random tripwires that could injure their own men. Dismissed. Dalton did not argue, but he did not forget. The scout cars kept coming. More men kept dying. The approved methods required equipment they did not have. The unauthorized method required wire shovels and a willingness to face a court-martial. On the night of March 10, 1944, Dalton made his decision. Another 222 had killed 2 men that afternoon, Privates Chen and Harrison. Chen was a radio operator from San Francisco. Harrison was from Oklahoma, always talking about his farm. Both were dead because a scout car rolled through at 4 p.m. and no one could stop it. Dalton waited until midnight. The company was dug in along the Rapido River Valley 2 miles south of Casino. German positions were visible on the ridgeline to the north. The scout cars used a dirt road that ran parallel to the Allied lines about 400 yards out, predictable root tree cover on both sides, perfect ground for reconnaissance. Dalton slipped a coil of barbed wire from the supply dump 30 feet rusted, but still strong. He took 2 entrenching tools, the folding shovels every soldier carried, and moved out alone. No permission, no backup, no witnesses. The March night was cold. Mud sucked at his boots with every step. Artillery rumbled to the north, distant and constant, like thunder that never ended. The road was empty, but that meant nothing. German patrols used it too. If they caught him here, he would be dead or captured. He stopped where the road narrowed between 2 oak trees, clear visibility from the American lines, limited visibility from the German side until you were almost on top of it. He drove the first shovel into the ground on the left side of the road, angling it back toward American positions. The blade sank 6 inches into the mud. Not enough. He found a rock and hammered it deeper. 12 inches. Stable. The second shovel went in on the right side 18 feet away. He measured the distance by pacing. Then came the wire. He wrapped it around the first shovel's handle, 3 tight loops. His hands were slick with mud and rust. The wire bit into his palms. He felt blood mix with the cold. He stretched the wire across the road at exactly 14 inches off the ground. Not ankle height, not waist height. Axle height for a light armored car. 2 weeks earlier, during a patrol, he had measured a destroyed 222. The front axle sat between 13 and 15 inches, depending on load. The wire had to catch it at speed without snapping. He wrapped the other end around the second shovel. 3 loops again. He tested the tension. The wire hummed. The shovels held. Too loose and it would fail. Too tight and it would break. He adjusted, tightened, tested again. The wire sang when he plucked it. The whole setup took 23 minutes. Dalton sat in the ditch afterward, breathing hard, watching the road. If a patrol came now, he would have to run. If an officer discovered it, court-martial. If it worked, maybe fewer men would die. That was the calculation. Simple math from the rail yards. Risk versus reward. He buried the wire under a thin layer of mud, not enough to weaken it, just enough to make it invisible in low light. The shovels were already rusted and dirty. They looked like abandoned equipment. Someone would have to be looking directly at them to notice. And by the time they did, it would be too late. Dalton crawled back to the American lines at 1:15 a.m. He told no one. He couldn't. Morrison had been clear. This was unauthorized. This violated doctrine. This was exactly the kind of initiative the Army punished, even when it saved lives. He lay in his foxhole and waited for dawn. The wire was out there, taut, invisible, waiting. The scout car appeared at 6:43 a.m. on March 12, 1944. Dalton was on watch eating cold rations from a tin. The morning fog was thick enough to cut. Then he heard the distinctive whine of a German straight-six engine coming from the north at moderate speed. He didn't move. He didn't call out. No one else had heard it yet. The car emerged from the fog at 600 yards. Gray paint. Commander's hatch open, moving at what Dalton judged to be 15 miles per hour. A routine patrol. They weren't expecting contact. 500 yards. Leave a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you tuning in from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community spans the entire world. Dalton could see the commander clearly now, binoculars raised, scanning the fog-softened horizon. The gunner traversed the 20mm cannon, slow and casual, more boredom than caution. 400 yards. The car stayed on the road perfect. 300. Dalton's hands shook. This either worked or it didn't. If it failed, the scout car would map their position and call in artillery. If it worked, he had violated direct orders and there would be consequences. He didn't care. Chen and Harrison were dead 2 days ago. Vargas, Brennan, Kowalski. The list was already too long. 200 yards. The car accelerated slightly, eager to clear the area. 50 yards from the wire. Dalton could see the front wheels now mud-caked, spinning fast. At 6:47 a.m., the wire caught the front right wheel. The effect was immediate and violent. The wheel locked. The axle seized. But momentum, 15 miles per hour, 22 feet per second, didn't stop. The locked wheel became a pivot. The nose dipped, the rear lifted, and the vehicle went vertical. It rolled once, twice, 3 times, tumbling through mud and torn metal before coming to rest upside down, the engine still screaming. Dalton was already moving. He grabbed his M1 and ran toward the wreck, shouting for covering fire. Soldiers poured out of their positions, rifles up. Smoke billowed from the engine compartment. The commander lay dead, thrown clear, during the second roll, his neck broken. The gunner was pinned beneath the turret, unconscious and bleeding. The driver crawled through the shattered windshield, dazed but alive. Dalton reached him first, a German, barely 22, blonde hair, matted with blood, hands raised. No fight left. Dalton dragged him clear and handed him off to Private Morrison, no relation to the captain. Then Dalton saw the wire, still wrapped around the front axle, still looped tight around the rusted shovel handles. The shovels had been ripped from the ground and dragged nearly 20 feet, but the wire had held. Dalton unwound it fast, coiled it tight, and shoved it into his pack before anyone could see clearly what had stopped the car. Captain Morrison arrived 6 minutes later. He studied the overturned scout car, then Dalton. What happened? It flipped, sir. Must have hit something in the road. Morrison circled the wreck, searching for mines, bazooka damage, anything that fit doctrine. He found nothing. No penetrations, no blast marks. Just a scout car, destroyed by a roll that made no sense. Corporal, scout cars don't just flip. Yes, sir. Morrison knew something was off, but the vehicle was neutralized, a prisoner taken, and no Americans were dead. He let it go. Document the vehicle, photographs, and a report. By noon, everyone in the company knew the official story didn't add up. Scout cars didn't flip themselves. But Dalton wasn't talking, and no one else had seen it happen. At 2 p.m., Private Morrison, the man who'd taken the prisoner, found Dalton cleaning his rifle. What really happened out there? Dalton didn't look up. Car flipped. "Jimmy, I saw wire in your pack. I saw the shovels." Dalton stopped cleaning and looked up at him, holding the stare for a long, silent moment. They had gone through basic training together. Morrison was from Gary too, Southside. They'd known each other since they were kids. If anyone would understand, it was him. "You didn't see anything," Dalton said quietly. Morrison sat down beside him. "If I did see something," he said. After a moment, hypothetically, would it work again? Dalton didn't hesitate. "Yes." Morrison looked at him. "Can you teach me 6?" That night after dark, Dalton showed him 2 more shovels, 30 more feet of barbed wire, a different stretch of road, 300 yards north. Same height, same tension, same shallow burial. Morrison said it himself while Dalton watched. By March 15th, 6 soldiers knew the method. Dalton hadn't told them. Morrison told one. That man told another. The knowledge moved the way it always does in the Army, through whispers after officers went to sleep. Private Jackson rigged one on the road to San Pietro. Private Ali set one near the Garigliano River. Corporal Williams strung one across a trail the Germans used for night patrols. None had permission. None wrote it down. They just did it. The second 222 hit Jackson's wire on March 18th. Same result. The car flipped. The commander was killed. The crew injured. Jackson was smart enough to remove the wire before anyone investigated. The third car struck Ali's trap on March 21st. It didn't flip completely, but it hit hard enough to disable the vehicle. The crew abandoned it and ran. By March 25th, German reconnaissance activity in the 34th Division sector had dropped by 60%. The 222s were still probing, but now they moved slower, chose different routes, hesitated. Something had changed. They didn't know what. Lieutenant Klaus Richter of the 29th Panzer Grenadier Division noticed it first. He commanded a reconnaissance platoon, 3 222s veteran crews. He had been running patrols in the casino sector since January. He knew the roads, he knew the American lines, and he knew that in 2 weeks, 3 of his scout cars had been destroyed in ways that made no sense. On March 27th, he personally examined the wreckage of the latest loss, SDKFZ-22 number 237, flipped on the road to Cervaro. Commander dead, gunner wounded. Driver claimed the car had stopped abruptly at speed. Richter crawled under the wreck. The front axle was bent but intact. No mine damage, no explosive residue. But there were scrape marks on the wheel housing signs that something thin and strong had caught the axle at speed. In the wheel well, he found a fragment of wire, rusted barbed wire. Standard issue German or American, impossible to tell. But the placement wasn't accidental. Someone had strung it across the road at exactly the right height to catch a scout car's front axle. Richter filed his report with Division Intelligence on March 29th. The response was skeptical. Barbed wire, they said, could not stop a light armored car. The mass and momentum were too great. But Richter insisted. 3 cars destroyed. Same pattern. All inexplicable until you considered wire. German intelligence questioned captured Americans. None admitted knowledge of tripwires. Searches of the dead turned up no documentation. It wasn't in U.S. manuals. It wasn't in their training. But it was happening. By early April, German reconnaissance units operating around Casino were under standing orders to scan roads for wire obstacles before advancing. Scout cars slowed to half speed. Commanders dismounted to inspect suspicious ground. The caution cut their effectiveness by nearly 40%. The Americans didn't know why the Germans had suddenly become careful, but they noticed the change immediately. Patrols were less frequent, less aggressive. Artillery strikes called in by reconnaissance dropped by half. Casualties from scout car attacks all but stopped. And officially, no one knew anything about tripwires. Captain Morrison figured it out on April 3, 1944. He was inspecting defensive positions when he found Private Williams stringing wire across a logging road, 2 shovels barbed wire, at axle height exactly like Dalton's setup. Williams froze. Morrison studied the wire, then walked over and tested the tension himself. "Where'd you learn this?" Williams said nothing. "That's an order, Private. Corporal Dalton, sir." Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled out his notebook and began sketching angles, measurements, wire type. He had Williams demonstrate the installation while he took notes. "How many have you set up?" "4, sir. Results 1. Hit. Scout car flipped. Crew captured." Morrison closed the notebook. The field manual didn't authorize it. He had explicitly ordered Dalton not to pursue improvised measures. "Yes, sir." Morrison looked down the empty road, artillery rumbling in the distance. The war was still killing men. And here was a method that worked, required no special equipment, and saved lives. "Show me 2 more setups before dark," he said. "Different terrain." "That's an order." By April 10th, Morrison had documented 17 wire installations across the company's sector. He interviewed the soldiers, recorded outcomes, ran the numbers. 87% of scout cars that hit the wires were disabled. 0 friendly casualties. Total material cost 30 feet of barbed wire and 2 shovels equipment already in the supply system. He wrote a 3-page report with specifications, tactical recommendations, and statistical validation, and sent it to battalion on April 12th. The reply came back on April 19th. Method unauthorized. Discontinue. Immediately violates field manual regulations regarding obstacle placement and engineering safety standards. Morrison read it twice. Then he filed it and did nothing. The wires stayed up. The casualty rate stayed down. Officially, nothing was happening. But the numbers told a story battalion command couldn't ignore forever. In February 1944, before the wires, the 34th Infantry Division lost 47 men to reconnaissance vehicle attacks. In March, after the method spread, they lost 12. In April 3, reconnaissance vehicle sightings dropped from 147 in February to 89 in March to 34 in April. Artillery strikes called in by German reconnaissance fell from 203 to 127 to 58. Let us know if someone in your family ever served in the military. One simple comment lets us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for helping ensure that James Dalton is not forgotten. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that real. Someone at division level noticed. Colonel Anderson, the division intelligence officer, pulled the casualty reports and saw the pattern. Numbers that didn't lie. In late April, he sent investigators forward. They found the tripwires within 2 days. Anderson's response was practical. He couldn't officially approve a method that violated doctrine, but he couldn't ignore results either. So he chose the only option the system allowed. He did nothing. No order to stop. No order to continue. Just a memo that went nowhere, and a blind eye turned toward the front. In May 1944, the 34th Infantry Division was pulled off the line for rest and refit. Dalton's company moved to a rear area near Naples. Real beds, hot food, no scout cars. On May 23rd, Dalton was summoned to division headquarters. He reported in his cleanest uniform, which still looked like it had survived a war. Anderson met him inside a canvas tent. "Corporal Dalton," he said, "I've read the reports about your wire method." Dalton started to speak. Anderson cut him off. "You're not here to be punished. You're here because I need you to teach it." Dalton hadn't expected that. Anderson explained that another division was rotating into the sector. They needed a way to deal with reconnaissance. The official anti-tank school took 3 weeks and required equipment the Army didn't have. Dalton's method took 1 night and scrap from the supply dump. "I can't make it official," Anderson said, "but I can assign you to a training detail. We'll call it improvised obstacle emplacement in the paperwork. Nobody needs to know what that really means." For 2 weeks in June 1944, Dalton trained 60 soldiers. Placement, height, tension, concealment, removal, everything learned the hard way. The men were skeptical. At first, wire wasn't supposed to stop armor. Dalton showed them photographs of overturned scout cars. He showed them casualty numbers. Skepticism faded. By July, the method had spread to 3 divisions. By August, it was being used across the Italian front. Never official, never written down, never added to manuals. Just quiet knowledge passed from soldier to soldier, unit to unit. Conservative estimates credit Dalton's Tripwire method with destroying or disabling 43 German reconnaissance vehicles between March and August 1944. Those vehicles would have called in hundreds of artillery strikes. Those strikes would have killed hundreds of men. Lives saved are impossible to calculate precisely, but 300 to 400 is a reasonable number. The official record told a different story. The drop in casualties was attributed to improved defensive awareness and enhanced anti-tank capabilities. Dalton's name appeared nowhere. No commendation, no citation. The Army preferred it that way. Admitting that a corporal had solved a problem the engineering corps hadn't was bad for doctrine, and worse for pride. James Dalton survived the war. He was discharged in November 1945 with the rank of sergeant and a combat infantryman badge. There were no medals for the tripwires, no citations, no official recognition beyond what his fellow soldiers gave him, which in truth was all he ever wanted. He went home to Gary, Indiana. In January 1946, U.S. Steel hired him as a switchman. The same rail yards, the same couplers and cables, the same problem solved with wire and leverage. He married a woman named Dorothy from East Chicago. They had 3 children. Dalton never talked much about Italy. When asked, he would shrug and say he did his job and came home. Once a year, on March 12th, the phone would ring. Morrison, Williams, Jackson, short calls, a few minutes. They remembered Chen and Brennan and Vargas. They remembered the fog, the scout cars, and the wire. Then they hung up and went back to their lives. In 1963, a military historian researching German reconnaissance losses in Italy noticed something strange: an unexplained spike in vehicle rollovers in early 1944, concentrated almost entirely in the casino sector. He interviewed veterans. Eventually, through Morrison, he found Dalton. Dalton agreed to one interview. He explained the method. He gave dates, measurements, results. Then he asked that his name not be used. The historian honored the request. When the article appeared in 1965 in the Journal of Military History, the innovation was credited only to unidentified NCOs of the 34th Infantry Division. James Dalton died in 1987, age 63, of a heart attack in his living room. His obituary in the Gary Post-Tribune said he had served in World War II and worked 41 years at U.S. Steel. It did not mention tripwires, or scout cars, or the hundreds of lives quietly spared. Dorothy knew he had done something important in Italy. She never knew exactly what. The method outlived the man. Post-war analysis by Army engineers validated the concept. In 1949, wire obstacles placed at axle height were formally integrated into U.S. doctrine as an approved method for disabling light reconnaissance vehicles. Training manuals credited field observations from the Italian campaign. Modern militaries still teach variations of the technique. Counter-IED doctrine includes wire-based vehicle traps. The principle hasn't changed. Sometimes the simplest solution really is the best one. And sometimes soldiers in the mud understand reality better than officers at headquarters. That's how innovation actually happens in war, not through committees and memoranda, not through perfectly equipped test ranges, but through corporals who can't watch their friends die anymore. Through switchmen who learned to solve problems with wire and shovels because nobody was going to give them anything better. Through men who risked punishment to save lives and never asked for credit. The wire is still taught. The method is still used. And the man who invented it went back to the rail yards and told almost no one. Sometimes that's exactly right.